This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Morning, everyone. The Yom Tov of Hanukkah spans 8 days, and even though, of course, it's not mentioned in the Chumash, and it's barely mentioned in the Mishnah, and there's no Masechta on Hanukkah, in the Sefer Bnei Yissaschar, there is more information on the Yom Tov of Hanukkah than any other subject. But amazingly, as much information as there is on the Yom Tov of Hanukkah, the Gemara Masechta Chulin discusses Purim to the extent where the Gemara asks, Esther minat Torah minayin, Vanochi haster aster es panai, Haman minat Torah minayin. The Gemara looks to discover the source in the Chumash for the heroes and the villains of the Purim story. Ask Rav Shlomo Kluger, what about Chanukah? Why doesn't the Gemara ask in Chulin, Chanukah minat Torah minayin, Antiochus minat Torah minayin, Yochanan Kohen Gadol minat Torah minayin, Dreidel minat Torah minayin? Why do we only have to find the source in the Chumash for Purim? How about Chanukah? Why has Chanukah been omitted? Why is there no explicit reference to Chanukah discovered by the Gemara? Furthermore, Rav Shlomo Kluger asks, there's one particular phrase in the Al Anisim that it's very hard to explain. None of them Mefarshim explain. The expression goes, Ula Amcha Yisrael, Asisa Teshuvah Gedola, Ufurkan Kehayoim Hazeh. And for Klal Yisrael, you made a salvation as of this day. What's that supposed to mean? As opposed to tomorrow? Obviously, whenever the miracle happened, it happened on that day. What does the nusach mean? Ufurkan kehayoim hazeh, of this very day. So here's the problem. The problem is that everything you've heard about Hanukkah until now, it's not really true. Whatever they told you, that's just, because we were not sophisticated really to understand what actually transpired. But we need to upgrade our understanding of Hanukkah. We cannot reduce ourselves to our former understanding of Hanukkah. What are the possibilities? What exactly are we celebrating? That they found one flask of oil and it was enough to last for one night, and miraculously it lasted for 8 nights. Do you really think that we have an 8-day Yom Tov to celebrate oil lasting longer than it's supposed to? Since when do we celebrate a miracle? Since when do we have a Yom Tov for a miracle? In the times of the Bayis Rishon, the Ner Ma'aravi lit for 410 years. Is there any Yom Tov to commemorate the continuous burning of the Ner Ma'aravi? Is there any day on the calendar that we even remember the burning of the Ner Ma'aravi? No. The Ner Ma'aravi is forgotten. Nobody makes a big deal about the Ner Ma'aravi. The Mishnah says in Perkei Avos that in the Beis HaMikdash daily, 10 miracles transpired. Do we have a Yom Tov to commemorate any of those miracles? No. Is there a day on the calendar? Okay, everyone, go to, where do you go shopping here in Flatbush? Go to Glatmart, go to Pomegranate, go to ShopSmart, get meat, leave it out in the sun for a week, and then come back a week later to celebrate the miracle that in the Beis HaMikdash the meat never rot. Is there such a Yom Tov? Do you have a Yom Tov? You turn on your barbecue, you let the smoke go, and the wind can't blow it. It goes up in a straight column to commemorate the miracle of the smoke in the Beis. We don't commemorate miracles. The Beis HaMikdash, routinely, there were miracles every single day. Do you really think there's a Yom Tov to commemorate the fact that oil that was supposed to last for one night lasted for 8 nights? What difference does it make? Miracles happened every single day. They were commonplace in the Beis HaMikdash. He said, no, it's for the military victory. Rabim biyad ma'atim. Did the Jewish people ever fight a war that was not Rabim biyad ma'atim? Which nation have we ever encountered in military encounter that was not Rabim biyad? Which nation did we ever attack that we outnumbered? Do you know of any historical episodes? When Yoshua ben Nun came into Canaan, and he had to attack 31 kings. What do you call that? That wasn't Rabim biyad ma'atim? When was the last time the Jewish people fought a war that wasn't Rabim biyad ma'atim? The miracle of Chanukah, Rabim biyad ma'atim. No, that's not really what happened. So what exactly are we celebrating on Hanukkah? We know there's no Masechta on Chanukah. That's a famous question. And purportedly, Chassam Sofer said, and this is brought in the Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim, that who redacted the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi redacted the Mishnah, and Rabbi is a scion of the Malchus Beis David, and he was standing up for the honor of the Malchus Beis David because the Chashmonaim inappropriately usurped the Melucha, and therefore Rabbi did not want to give too much kavod to the Chashmonaim, and therefore there's no Masechta on Chanukah. Now this is a very controversial Chassam Sofer. In Chidush Chassam Sofer this doesn't appear. In Chassam Sofer Masechta Shabbos he says a completely different reason. So whether the Chassam Sofer said this or not, it's hard to know. We do have other evidence that Rebbe, when he redacted the Mishnah, he very much upheld the honor of the Malchus Beis David. For instance, Seder Nashim begins with which Masechta? Yevamis. Now, is that a logical place to start Seder Nashim? First should come Kedushin, then Ksubis. And then you want to talk about a far-fetched case of Yibam, you could talk about Yevamis. Why is Yevamis the first Masechta in Seder Nashim? So the Maser Rikeach writes, because who redacted the Mishnah? Rebbe. And Rebbe comes from Malchus Beis David. And the whole Malchus Beis David is banoi on mitzvah of Yibum, like we find in this week's Parsha. Yehuda was told his sons to be Meyabim Talah, their sister, and then Yehuda was Meyabim Tamar. In fact, the Ben La'ashri, the Tzaddik Ranana writes that the opening words of this week's Parsha, Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Megurei Rashi Tevois Yibum, because that's the main feature of Parshas Vayeshev, the mitzvah of Yibum. Therefore, since Malchus Beis David is based on Yibum, whether it's Yehuda and Tamar, Rus and Boaz, and other examples, therefore Rebbe wanted to be Mechabed Yibum, and he gave Yevamis the distinction of being the first Masechta in Seder Nashim. So, okay, Rebbe has some authority, Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, of how to redact the Mishnah, and therefore there's no Masechta on Chanukah. We'd like to explore perhaps a new reason. So many years ago, I heard a recording from a rabbi in England named Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, who was originally from Ireland, who quoted over something he heard from Rav Soloveitchik. This is a very jarring concept, and we're going to examine it to see what historical evidence there is for such an idea. And it's based on a stira between two Gemaras. Let's start with the Gemara in Moed Katan in number 6. The Gemara tells us, Amar Reb Chelbai, Amar Rav Huna, Haroya Sefer Torah Shenikra. If somebody sees the tragic scene, he sees a Sefer Torah that is torn, Chayiv L'Kroya Shtei Kriyos. He's obligated to tear 2 tearings. One is obligated to rise Kriya twice. There's no greater tragedy than to witness the ripping of a Sefer Torah. If one sees such a thing, they have to tear Kriya twice. Says the Gemara, Echad al hagvil v'echad al aksav. One for the words and one for the parchment. You know, the parchment also has Kedushas Oisios Sefer Torah.
So what happens if the words aren't? If it bears it in the spot where the word, there's no word, there's no Oisios.
Then you have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi what to do. I'm not local, I'm from the 5-town. So I would say you have to rip twice. You have to rip one for the Gvil, because the Oisios also, their Kedusha is enhanced by being part of a kosher Sefer Torah. So even if they're not actually torn, but they're split in the word, also it affects the Kedusha not only of the Gvil, but of the Oisios. That's what I would say, al regalachas. But you know, the Zohar famously says, Yisrael is Rosh Tevois, Yesh Shishim Riboy Oisios La Torah. And the question is, Pnei Yeshua asks, other ask, that there are only about half that number of letters, only about 300,000 letters. So one of the answers that the Chidah gives is that the Gvil, the space in between the letter, also has Kedushas Sefer Torah. Therefore the Gemara says, if somebody sees the tearing of a Sefer Torah, they have to rip Kriya twice. One for the letter and one for the parchment. Here's the question. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that they were taking out Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion to be executed. By the way, we just had Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion in last week's Parsha. In the Parsha, Or Chaim HaKadosh says, V'hine rachavas yadayim rachavas Rosh Tevas Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, whose neshama was in Shechem. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh. Anyway, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion was taken out to be killed. Shaya Yoshev v'oisik b'Torah umakel kehilos barabim the Sefer Torah munach le b'cheitai. Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion was giving Shiur, and he had the Sefer Torah in his lap. Karchuhu b'Sefer Torah, they wrapped him up in the Sefer Torah. V'hikifu b'chavlei zemaros, and they encircled him with vine branches. V'hitzisu b'henes ha'ar, they lit it aflame, and they turned to Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, and they said, Rebbe, erecha b'kach, do we have to see you in such a state? And he said, Omar lo el mole ani nisrafti levadi hayadavar kashali. If only I would be consumed, I would be troubled. Because maybe I'll be consumed and nobody would ever stand up for my honor. Achshav sha'ani nisraf the Sefer Torah yimi. Now that I'm being burnt with the Sefer Torah, he who takes up the cause of the Sefer Torah will take up my cause. Amruloi Talmidav, the student said to Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, Ma'ataraya, what do you see? Amar lahen, Gilyain nisrafim v'oises parchais. Sefer Torah is being burnt, and the letters are flying up. They cannot destroy kedushas oisei Sefer Torah. The letters of the Sefer Torah are not being destroyed. They fly off the klaf, and they're parech ba'avir. As Rav Soloveitchik, that means the Gemara is telling us that you can't destroy the letters of a Sefer Torah. So if you can't destroy the letters of a Sefer Torah, then why does the Gemara Moed Katan Paskin that if you see a Sefer Torah torn, you have to tear Kriya twice, one for the Gevil and one for the Oisiyos? The Oisiyos can't be destroyed. It's Oisiyos Parchos. The Gemara Avodah Zarah says you can't destroy the letters of a Sefer Torah. So if you can't destroy the letters of a Sefer Torah, then why do you have to tear Kriya twice? Herein lies the secret of Hanukkah. As we mentioned, whatever you thought until now, respectfully request you dismiss. It's not about the oil lasting for 8 days, and it's not about military victory. That's the superficiality of the story to explain to those who are not yet ready to hear the true story. The true story is that the Gzera of Yevanim was a unique Gzera. Never before and never again did such a thing happen. Because every other Golos and Jewish tragedy, the Goyim come with the following mission. Lehashmid, laharoig, uliabed. They come to annihilate. They come for the kill. And for that objective, they are uniquely suited at that task. They fit the bill. They are uniquely qualified. Lahashmid, laharoig, uliabed. But here's the problem. If Gentiles come to affect the sanctity and the kedusha of the Jewish people, they're not capable of rendering us tameh. They're not capable of lechalel ulatame. An akum, a goy, cannot be mechalel, cannot be matame. Only a Yisrael can be mechalel and matame. Case in point. So you go for breakfast to the store, you go to the bagel store, and Jose is preparing your bagel. So you say, Jose, I want everything bagel. I want low-fat tuna, lettuce, and tomatoes. So Jose is there. The last time he put on gloves was 10 years ago. He's touching your sandwich. I have a question. What's the halacha? If somebody wakes up in the morning, you're allowed to touch food before you wash negavasser? Can't wash that. You're allowed to touch your eyes, your ears before you wash negavasser? You can't. What if your eye is closed? Could you touch the outside of your eye, the outside of your? Machloikas achroinim, Mishnah Berurah paskins, like the Artzos Hachayim or the Malim. You can't. You're going to contaminate. You're going to be metame. So I have a question. How could Jose prepare your bagel and tuna fish? He's contaminating. He's being metame. He washed negavasser. You think the Vad or Kehila, when the Jose walked into the store in the morning, they said, Jose, come here. We're going to wash negavasser. So he writes 3 times on the right hand. No. Right, left. No. You pick up the cup with your right hand, you put into the left hand, then you wash the right hand first, and then 4 times l'chachila. You think he washed Negelwasser in the morning?
Doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. Why? Because only somebody who has connection to Kedusha can render Tameh. Someone who has no connection to Kedusha cannot render Tameh. In fact, Shulchan Aruch Harav has a leniency that a young child who doesn't yet really have Nishmas Yisrael until they're 13, certainly until their age of Chinuch, there are certain leniencies before they wash Negelwasser and they touch food. Only a Yid could be Mechalel. Now the issue is, if the guy in the bagel shop is an irreligious Jew, so the kashrus of the store is great. The only thing is he contaminated your sandwich. So the poskim discuss it. Probably by the time he got to your sandwich in the morning, he got his hands wet 3 times, and that's the kula that most rely on. But it's stuff from the poskim. The bottom line is, in order for somebody to be able to be matame and to be able to be mechalel, you need to have connection to Kedusha. And therefore, throughout history, the Gentiles, they attempt lahashmid, laroi, uliabed. They cannot desecrate, they cannot defile, that's not something they're capable of. That is until Golas Yavan. So how they do it in the times of Golas Yavan? They're Syrian Greeks. Syrian Greeks cannot be mechalel and they cannot be metame. Says Rav Soloveitchik, let's look a little bit closer in the Alanisim. Rabim biyad ma'atim, Tameim biyad tahorim, Rishon biyad tzadikim, Zaydim biyad oiskei sorasecha. Say it straight. Why doesn't the author of Alanisim say Goyim biyad Yisraelim? Why are they beating around the bush? All kinds of poetic and flowery. Just say it straight. Akum biyad Yisrael. And that is because the Chachamim were so careful to cover up the story. They didn't tell us the true story. It's not Akum biyad Yisrael. This was not the Greeks against the Jews. This was the Misyavnim against the Yisraelim. It wasn't Akum biyad Yisrael. The Akum could be Lahashmid Lareg Yabed. Only a Jew could try to defile the Torah. And the Chachamim were so careful not to write the words Goyim biyad Yisraelim because it's not true. And they would never say explicitly Yisrael Mumarim biyad Yisrael. But that's the true story. That's really what happened. The Goyim can't be Matame the Beis HaMikdash. Only Yisraelim can be Matame the Mikdash. And then Rav Soloveitchik writes a historic point that's certainly worthy of our consideration. He says this was the very first, and he says the last time, that the majority of the Jewish people were Heimiru Dasam and left the fold. He says, Zois hapam harishoina v'gam ha'achroina sheroiv ha'yehudim Heimiru es Dasam. This was the first and last time the majority of the Jewish people, they converted, they left the fold, and the reason they were able to be Matame the Mikdash is because they were Yisraelim, they weren't Goyim. Now I was hesitant to say this over until I found that this was printed in the 65th edition of Hadarom, which is a journal. Rav Shmaryo Shulman, who passed away this week, was one of the frequent contributors to Hadarom. And this is the approach that Rav Soloveitchik says. He says that every story has 2 parts to it. What we tell the kids, what we tell the Hamoinam, and then the true story. This is really what happened. The reason why there's no Masechta for Chanukah is because it's downright embarrassing for the Jewish people, and the Chachamim would never write a Masechta about Chanukah. It's shameful to us. So they throw the story under the rug. They tell us the oil lasted for 8 days. They tell us military victory. This was not a matter of military victory. This was not a matter of the oil. This was a matter of the greatest Teshuvah movement in the history of the Jewish people, where after the Jewish people left the fold, we came back to serve Hashem. So where does it say that? It says, V'achar kain bo'u vanecha levir beisach. And afterwards your children came. One simple question. Afterwards they came. Where'd they come from? Where'd they go? What do you mean they came? Where were they? This is not something that happened in Chutz La'aretz and then they came back to Eretz Yisrael. This is something that happened in Yerushalayim. No one was chased out of Yerushalayim. Nobody was chased out of their home. Where exactly did they come from? They came from being Rachaik Me HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Torah and Emunah. They came back to the fold. We talk about kids at risk, teens at risk. This was nation at risk, not nation at risk. This was nation leaving the fold, the last and first time in the history of the Jewish people. So the question is, are you willing to accept this approach to the Hanukkah story? First, let's analyze this on two fronts. Number one, halachically, is that really the case? Can only Yisraelim be mechalel and be metame? Does a goy not have the capacity to be mechalel and metame? Ninveh? Goyim cannot do Teshuvah. That's a very important yesod. Goyim do not have the capacity to do Teshuvah. The Medrash says in Parshas Nosai, the Tanchuma, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'lo la'achkom. Asked Ramami Pano, what about Ninveh? Ramami Pano gives four answers. They didn't really do Teshuvah. Hashem delayed. Hashem pushed it off. Many Goyim are not capable of doing Teshuvah.
Doesn't the Gemara say that if a goy in war can take more than Zvachim, that a goy can take something in the Mechal if he captures it in war?
The Gemara says that a Jew in war might be able to eat kadli de chaziri.
In war, goyim are able.
Okay, so maybe what you're referring to, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah.
Yeah.
The Gemara in Avodah Zarah quotes a pasuk in Yecheskel. Take a look at number 10. The pasuk says, "V'hasiboisi fanai mehem, v'chilalu es tzifuni, uva paritzim v'chilaluha." The wanton ones will come in and desecrate it. Bo'u paritzim v'chilaluha. This is a yesod in halacha. Bo'u paritzim v'chilaluha. For example, Chassam Sofer says, the Gemara says in Tainus, there's a machlokes. When do you commemorate the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? We commemorate the 9th because that's when it was set aflame. Rabbi Yochanan says, if I would have been there, I would have commemorated the 10th. Ruba Shel Heichal burnt on the 10th. Chassam Sofer says, so what do the Chachamim say? So the Chassam Sofer, this yesod, when the Goyim came and they set fire to the Beis Hamikdash, it lost its kedusha. Bo'u paritzim v'chilaluha. So on the 10th, it wasn't a Beis Hamikdash anymore. So since it wasn't a Beis Hamikdash, it was a secular building that was burning, and that's why we commemorate the 9th and not the 10th. But here's the issue. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that the Chashmonaim came into the Beis Hamikdash, and they were meshaketz the mizbeach la'avodas kochavah. They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. How could they do such a thing? Amar Papa, Kra Ashkach V'Darash, Bo'u Paritzim V'Chilaluha. The Paritzim came and they defiled the Mizbeach. Asked the Ramban and the Mochames, how could the Goyim defile the Mizbeach? Goyim can't defile. Not only that, if let's say somebody comes into your house and you invite them to your house for Shabbos, and you bring out the gefilte fish, and you come back to the table, and they're down on their hands and knees, and they're koirim and shtachavim to your table. So what are you doing? I'm being oived avodah zarah. I want to accept your table as avodah zarah. What happens to your table? Nothing. Ein adam oiser davar she'eino shaloi. You can't ask for something that doesn't belong to you. So somebody cannot worship your table and then ask for it. However, says Ramban, so how could the Yevanim be meshaketz the mizbeach? Says the Ramban, hektish shani. Hektish is different. Since the mizbeach is hektish, and hektish is more sensitive to kedusha, therefore the goyim have the capacity to be meshaketz the mizbeach. That's the shita of the Ramban, which is really against what we're saying so far. Namely, we were saying goyim don't have the capacity to be mechalel and be metame. Shitas Ramban is they can't be metame chulim, they could be metame hektish. Comes the Baal Amar. I believe we have it on the sheet here. The Baal Amar in number 17. And the Baal Amar says, Avada, not only can you not ask for something that doesn't belong to you, Goyim cannot be metame and mechalel anything. Goyim don't have the capacity to be machal matame. So what happened? What happened with the Mizbeach? Says the Baal Amar, the Yevanim weren't meshaketz the Mizbeach. They tried to, they worshipped it, they were makriv avodah zarah, but they can't affect anything on the Mizbeach. You know who was meshaketz the Mizbeach? The Misyavnim were meshaketz the Mizbeach. So according to the Baal Amar, he's documenting the story. This is not about the Yevanim. The Misyavnim were Mechalel the Beis HaMikdash. The Misyavnim were Mechalel the Shemen. The Yevanim can't be Mechalel the Shemen. So this whole concept seems to be Machlokes Rishonim, the Ramban, and the Baal Hamar. That's the Gzeres HaKosav, that if Oived Avodah Zarah pours the wine, then it's...
But your wine is not the what's called. His wine is fine. So if he does your wine,
that's implicit in the din of Ayayin Nesach. That's the din. Any wine, it applies to anyone.
Doesn't the Gemara ask about gold? It have to be used any gold was not as that because it might be it's sort of Elah, it might have come from the Beis HaMikdash.
Okay, we're not choshesh for that. Let's talk about the second aspect. Are these the facts of the story? Is this what happened at the time of Hanukkah? That the majority of the Jewish people left the fold, the majority of Klal Yisrael were Heimer Dasam, V'achar Kein Bo'u Banecha, that it's Yisraelim B'yad Yisraelim, and there's no Masechta on Chanukah because we're embarrassed about the story. Let's talk about the Al Hanisim itself. Anybody know how many words in Al Hanisim? It's a Machlokes Rishonim. How many words are in Al Hanisim? Either 124 or 125. Says the Kolbai, there are 124 words in Al Hanisim. Gematria, Yochanan. Because Al Hanisim was written by none other than Yochanan Kohen Gadol. The Redaction writes, no, there are 125 words in Al Hanisim. Because it was written by Yochanan. And Yochanan is Gematria 124. And Mebnei An V'Sanusa, because of his humility, he made it have one more word than the numerical value of his name. So Yochanan wrote Al Hanisim. Who's Yochanan? Is Yochanan good for the Jews? Or is Yochanan not good for the Jews? What do we know about Yochanan Kohen Gadol? So the Gemara tells us, Al tamin ba'atzmacha ad yoim ha'isai. Don't trust in yourself until your final day. Take a look at number 19, Brachos Chavtes Amud Aleph. Al tamin ba'atzmacha ad yoim ha'isai. Why? Yochanan Kohen Gadol shimesh b'kohuna gedola shmoinim shana. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he was the Nasi of the Moyetzes, he was the Kohen Gadol, he was the Tzaddik Hadar for 80 years, all of a soif natzah tzeduki, and he went off. He became a heretic. Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So it's Machlokes. Amar Rabbi said, no, here's the deal. Yanaihu, he was Yanai. In other words, he started off as a Rasha, he became about Teshuvah, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and then he veered off again. You know when you can't trust yourself? When you start off rotten, then you can never trust yourself. But someone who starts off as a tzaddik will never veer off. That's the opinion of Abai. Rava said no. Yanai l'chud, Yochanan l'chud. Yanai Rasha meikara, Yochanan tzaddik meikar. Rava says Yochanan was a tzaddik from the beginning, and then he veered off. So that means there was somebody who was the Kohen Gadol. He served for 80 years, one of the Gedolei Hadar, and then he became a heretic. Who is this Yochanan Kohen Gadol? Is this Bimei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol? Was the hero of Chanukah the son of the Gadol Hadar who became a heretic? So there's a Teshuvah in the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and the Kloisenberger Rebbe said he heard b'shem his great Zayda, the Bnei Yissaschar, absolutely. Matisyahu was the son of a tzedaki. He was the Gadol Hadar and he became a tzedaki. And not only did my Zayda, the Bnei Yissaschar, write that, I heard from Boitzina de Nahoira, Rav Baruch Mimeshbesh, he also holds this way. That Matisyahu was the son of Yochanan Kohen Gadol who went off. Not only that, Kloisenberger Rebbe brings an incredible remez. That means Yochanan Kohen Gadol, if he was a tzedaki, then at the end of his tenure, when he was bringing the Ketores, he made the fire outside the Kodesh HaKodashim, and then he brought it in, contradistinction to the Prushim who make the fire inside. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he did the avodah bepsul avada, says Rabbi Mimezresh. And it's merumas in the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos. How? Rabbi Yochanan Omar, excuse me, Hiniach chenveni neiroi mi bachutz chayiv. If the chenveni, says Rabbi Mimezresh, chenveni oisi ois Yochanan. Hiniach chenveni. When Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Hiniach neiro, when he left the fire of the Torah outside, chayiv, he was liable. He was no longer a loyal member of the Jewish people. But says Reb Kleisenberger Rebbe, he heard b'shem Rabbi Mimezresh that even though Yochanan Kohen Gadol veered off, ultimately through the story of Hanukkah he had a tikkun, and that's also marumas in the Mishnah. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Remes Yehuda Maccabi b'ner Hanukkah pater. That's what the Kleisenberger Rebbe brings in the Teshuvah. Hiniach chenveni neiroi mi bachutz chayiv. It's a remes to Yochanan Kohen Gadol who went off, and he was chayiv, and somehow Yehuda Maccabi got him back in. How he got him back in?
The Gemara says that Yochanan was killed, or Yuma says that they found the step of the malach between the shoulders. He was killed.
Which Yochanan also?
I don't know.
Right? Which Yochanan? That's what Rabbi Mimezresh writes. By the way, this is not unanimous. The Gra vehemently disagrees. The Gra says absolutely not that Matasyahu was the son of Yochanan who veered off. No, Chas v'shalom. The hero of Hanukkah was the son of Tzedaki. Yochanan had a son Matasyahu. Matasyahu had a son Shimon. Shimon had a son Yochanan who was also a Kohen Gadol, and he became a Tzedaki. But the Bnei Yisachar and the Kleisenberger Rebbe and Rabbi Mimezresh say, no, it's the same one. You know who else agrees with them? Rabbi Yosef Shol Halevi Natanzan. In his Chidush in Masechta Shabbos, he says, it's the same Yochanan. Which seems to be very problematic. What's the halacha? You have a Gadol b'Yisrael who wrote a Sefer Nifla, and then he veered off. But the Sefer is good. What do you do with the Sefer? You're going as a Sefer. You can't learn from the Sefer. So Yochanan veered off and he wrote Al Hanisim, and we still say Al Hanisim? Can such a thing be that we say the tefillah of someone who became a tzedaki?
But you have Elisha ben Avuya, you still hold him in the Mishnah. You still quote him.
Elisha ben Avuya, his name is not quoted even one time in the whole Shas, except for one Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Ayin b'divrei Yoel, Parshas Chayesara. Haloi meid yelad l'mahu doimeh. Haloi meid yelad l'mahu doimeh. But that's it. We don't quote it. We won't quote his name. And even Reb Meir, when Reb Meir was learning from Acher, Rebbeinu Shalom said, I can't even say over Reb Meir's Torah for learning from Acher. And Eliyahu Hanavi had to get Reb Meir back into the base medrash. So you have to be very careful.
Why couldn't Matas Yoel been born when his father was a tzaddik? Right at that effect, that became a Rosh, as we tell you, wouldn't he?
But if Yochanan Kohen Gadol is the Yochanan became a Tzeduki, why would we continue to say his tefillah in the davening? So, some would say, because like the Gra, this is a different Yochanan. But there is an opinion. So let's analyze that for a second. Let's just imagine, do you think, according to the Bnei Yisachar and the Kleisenberger Rebbe, the Gadol Hadar, the Kohen Gadol, he was Meshamish B'Kun Gadol B'Shonim Shana, and then he veered off. You think that was like an isolated case? It happens to be one person who happens to be the Gadol Hadar became a tzedaki, but nobody paid any attention to such a thing. It's very highly unlikely that if Yochanan Kohen Gadol was the Kohen Gadol and the Gadol Hadar, that this is an isolated incident. Again, we don't have absolute evidence that anybody else was, but I think that's pretty telling. And even according to the Gra, Lamaisa, there was a Kohen Gadol by the name of Yochanan who became a Tzeduki. So I think that's quite telling as what was happening during that time. A friend of mine sent me another Maramakim, a drush of Hadrash Ve'o'iyon, the Reish Rav, who basically says this explicitly. The famous Gemara Masechta Shabbos, they went into the Heichal, and there wasn't enough oil, and they found one flask of oil. There was only enough to last for one night. It lasted for 8 nights. Says the Shiur Rav, you think that's what happened? The whole Gemara is a mashal. The whole Gemara is a mashal. Shemen, who's nimshal l'shemen? Klal Yisrael. When they came back into the Beis HaMikdash, they found one flask of oil. You know what that meant? There was one family in the Jewish people that was loyal to Torah mitzvahs. And that family was Matisyahu Banav. And from that little family, how long could they have continued on the history of Klal Yisrael? One night, a very short amount of time. And miraculously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave these mischazkim and these moisrei nefesh the ability to inspire the rest of Klal Yisrael and bring them back to the Mikdash and back to the Torah and back to Yiddishkeit. And from there, it lit for 8 nights, meaning lenetzach nitzachim. Says the Shiur Rav, whatever we just said today is merumas in the short lines of the Gemara. The one flask of oil is the small group of Yidden that remained loyal to Torah mitzvahs. It was only enough to continue Klal Yisrael for a short zman, and from there it continued to burn forever and ever and ever. So accordingly, what the Gemara is saying, the Gemara is really telling us the real story of the miracle of Hanukkah. Why? Avad, it's a chiddush. Otherwise, you don't need me to come here today, right? But
Yochanan was the father of Matisyahu. Matisyahu died before the Nitzachon of Hanukkah, and Yochanan outlived Matisyahu and wrote Al Hanisim after the Nitzachon of Hanukkah.
According to the opinion that was written by Yochanan, yes, right. According to the Bnei Yissaschar, that you have to say, yeah.
He outlived the son. No, the Shiur died before the next because his children took over.
Chanukah min ha-Torah minayin. Antiyoiches min ha-Torah minayin. Yochanan kohen gadol min ha-Torah minayin. No such thing. No such Gemara. There's no remes to them in the Chumash. Haman, yeah, he's got to be there. Esther's got to be there. Mordechai got to be there. There's no remes to Chanukah in the Torah. Says Reb Shlomo Kluger, listen to this chiddush. Purim has to be in the Chumash. Because like all miracles that Hashem usually performs, Hashem is masna, Hashem makes a t'nai with Brias ha'olam, vayoshav hayom le'eis sanoi l't'nai harishain. The Rebbe Hashem doesn't like to change nature. So how does the Rebbe Hashem make a miracle? When He created nature, He stipulates with nature that when the day comes for a miracle to happen, it's already pre-programmed into your bedrock that a miracle will happen. The miracle of Purim was pre-programmed from the beginning of time, from Brias Ha'olam. Anything that will ever occur has already been programmed into the Torah. With one exception. Chanukah was not pre-programmed into the Torah. Says Reb Shlomo Kluger, because Chanukah, Hashem could not compel to happen. Why would that be? Because Chanukah was so dependent on the free choice of the Jewish people to stand up at that time and to fight the tide and go against the majority of the Umas Ha'olam and the majority of the Jewish world, that the Rebbeinu Shem could not tamper in any way to compel the miracle of Chanukah to happen, and he could not be merames, not to Antiochus, not to Yochanan, and not to any of the heroes of Chanukah. By the way, Rav Shlomo Kluger writes this in his commentary to the Siddur Yeriyos Shloimei, which is only printed not in the first edition of Rabbi Yaakov Emden Siddur and not in the current edition of Rabbi Yaakov Emden Siddur. There was an intermediary edition of Rabbi Yaakov Emden Siddur with chidushim from Rav Shlomo Kluger. He says, that's the pshad, v'yachar kein bo v'anecha, ula'amcha Yisrael asisa Teshuvah gedoyla, uforkan kehayoim hazeh. As opposed to every other miracle that happened that was already prearranged from the beginning of time, the miracle of Chanukah is not programmed into istakel ba'iraisa ubara alma. It was dependent on the Mesiras Nefesh of those Jews at that time, and therefore it's not a miracle from the beginning of time. It's a miracle kehayoim hazeh daika in the lashon of the Alanisim. It is the most.
Ramban says that that they were Matthias Aaron, that his future generation will make a Chanukah of the Mizbeach, even though he didn't participate in the first one. It means it was already declared from that time on. That's what he told them.
So what the Ramban says is the Torah Shabbat Peh. It's not Mufurash Bikra. It's not Merumah. It's not.
He told Aaron.
Look, the Rebbeinu Shalom knows from before time everything that's going to take place. And on a certain dimension then, yes, it's certainly in the Torah Shabbat Peh. However, for it to be Chasav v'Chasim in the Torah Shabbat that would then compel Brias Ha'olam to move in that direction, that the Rebbeinu Shalom cannot do. That's what Rav Shlomo Kluger says.
It's an emes though, right?
Everything is Merumah. We could have 100 Ramazim to Chanukah. Let's start. Parshas Vayeshev. You ready? Once we're here already, this gentleman wants to hear some Ramazim to Chanukah on Parshas Vayeshev. So here's one you never heard before.
Yosef in the pit.
Yosef in the pit? No, you know that one already. Here it goes. Yosef has a dream, and in the dream of Yosef HaTzadik, the bundles of grain bow down to Yosef, and the pasuk says, "Vayosifu oid senoi oisai al chaloi moisav." For his dreams. What do you mean? He only had one dream so far. What do you mean chaloi moisav? He only had one dream. So the Bar Tanura says, it's Mavuar, that Yosef already had 2 dreams. That means in total, Yosef HaTzadik had 3 dreams. 2 recorded, 1 not mentioned in the Chumash. What's the 3rd dream not mentioned in the Chumash? The 3rd dream not mentioned in the Chumash, says the Bar Tanura, is you got to go to Parshas Vayechi. After the story of Hanukkah, after the story of Yosef reveals himself to the brothers, and Yaakov comes down, and then Yaakov passes on, and they bury Yaakov Avinu, and the Shvatim are starting to get very nervous. Now that Yaakov is dead, maybe Yosef would take revenge. So what does Yosef do? Vayinachim oisam, vayedaber el libam. What did Yosef tell the brothers? Says the Gemara Megillah on Daf Tezayin. Yosef told the brothers, if 10 candles couldn't put out 1 candle, how can 1 candle put out 10 candles? Meaning, if the 10 of you couldn't knock me out by throwing me into the pit, how am I going to get all 10 of you? Says the Bar Tanura, why is Yosef using the analogy of candles? Why doesn't Yosef say, if 10 powers, wild animals, lions couldn't attack 1 lion, then 1 can't attack 10? You know why Yosef uses the analogy of lions? Good, you're listening? Is because the first dream of Yosef was he saw 10 candles not able to extinguish 1 candle. That was the first dream of Yosef. And why isn't it recorded in this week's Parsha? Because when Yosef told the brothers, hey, brothers, guess what? The 10 of you can't harm me. He says, okay, have a great day. That doesn't bother us that you don't think we can harm you. But when Yosef has visions of grandeur, illusions of grandeur, that's what bothers the brothers. So the first dream is not recorded. Which means the first dream of Yosef in this week's Parsha is Neiros. You think it's a coincidence that the first dream of Yosef is about Neiros? After all, Vayeshev is the Parsha right before Hanukkah. Say, okay, come on, but it's 11 Neiros. What are 11 Neiros? Now watch this. That means Yosef saw 11 candles. And then he tells the brothers, guess what? I saw 11 candles. How many are we up to? 22. And then in Parshas Vayechi, Yosef tells the brothers, if 10 candles can't put out 1 candle, another 11, 33, then 1 can't put out 10, 44, Neiros Chanukah, beginning in Vayeshev, ending in Parshas Vayechi. So you say, what's it doing in Vayechi? Vayechi is after Chanukah. No, it's not. Yaakov Avinu passes away on what day of the year? What? Seder Adorah says, Tesvav, Tishrei. Yaakov Avinu passes away on Tishrei. That's why Yaakov is Keneged Sukkos. They cry for Yaakov 30 days. They embalm him for 40 days. 70 days of mourning. Says Chasam Sofer. Takes you from Tesvav Tishrei until Chafei Kislev. Then they mourn Yaakov for 7 days. 7th day of Hanukkah. And on Zois Chanukah, Yosef says, you ready for the remez of the 44 candles? If 10 can't put out 1 can't put out 10. When? Zois Chanukah. So that remez you never heard to Chanukah. So there are many ramazim to Chanukah. I'm going to tell you one more that you never heard. Yaakov tells Yosef, go find the brothers. Where are they? He goes Bishchem. Says the Zohar HaKadosh that when you're finished 24, which are the 24 letters of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusai, counted 24 letters in Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusai, you get to 25. Those are the 25 letters. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Chanukah. That's what the Zohar says. When you finish 24, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusai, you get to 25. Shema Yisrael. That's Chanukah. In fact, Tzror Hamor writes, Chanukah is Chanu. They were victorious. Chafhei bechafhei Azvan the Shema Yisrael. So therefore, Parshas Vayeshev, which is the Hakdama to Chanukah, Yaakov tells Yosef, let's get this going already. Bishchem! Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusai. And when that's done, we're ready for the Yom Tov of Chanukah. Haba Aleinu L'Taiva. Thank you so much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.